What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Canadian Football Fanatics YouTube channel. Thank you guys for tuning in to another video. The BC Lions are kicking off week number 2 in the CFL, traveling to the Winnipeg for Buck Pierce's return to face the Blue Bombers this week. Should be a lot of excitement on our preview video here today, as we will be joined by a guest once again. This week's special guest is going to be Zach Schnitzer of Bonfire Sports. We've had Zach on the platform here a few times over the past little while. Most recently, we had him on our mock draft live show. Zach, as I mentioned, a contributor to Bonfire Sports and a diehard Winnipeg Blue Bombers fan. I am very interested to have Zach on, hear his opinion on his Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and of course, on the matchup that is kicking off week number 2. Before we get into our initial thoughts of the matchup, and then Zach's going to join us here in a few moments, of course, all the reminders. As always, folks, you guys can like the video down below. Feel free to leave a comment. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel. When you guys subscribe, press the notification bell. You guys will get notified every single time we go live or upload any sort of video on the channel. It would be greatly appreciated, as we are, as of the recording of this video, 4 subscribers shy of 400 subscribers. So that would be a cool milestone for us to hit this week and continue to push our YouTube channel growth as high as we can. And of course, you guys can follow us on Twitter or X at _CF Fanatics over there. And of course, you guys can follow us on Instagram at Canadian Football Fanatics. We are doing really well over there. We are closing in on 3,000 followers over on our Instagram account. I believe we are just under 2,900 followers as of the recording of this video. So that would be another cool milestone, would be to hit 3,000 followers on the Instagram channel. It has been a lot of fun to try to grow that in just over a year's time now. Growing to 3,000 followers would be a super cool milestone going into the season, and hopefully we can hit 4,000 and 5,000 during this upcoming season would probably be the next goal. So other than that, as I mentioned, the BC Lions starting things off in week number 2, facing the Winnipeg Blue Bombers this Thursday, a 5:30 p.m. Pacific time kickoff, June 12th. The BC Lions and Winnipeg Blue Bombers are going to tangle. So before we get into our initial thoughts on the matchup, of course, a last few reminders. You guys can find us tomorrow or today, by the time you guys are actually listening to this, on our weekly show, our CFL weekly show over on the 13th Man Sports YouTube channel every week, where Coach Blake, Shane, and myself talking CFL football, giving our weekly picks, breaking down what happened the week before. Excited to do so with the fellas tomorrow. And of course, you guys can find us pending after the game. We are still deciding whether we are going to do a live post-game recap or a recorded post-game recap, and we'll get it to you guys on Friday morning. If you guys are listening and would care to maybe chime in, feel free to comment down below if you guys would like to have a live post-game recap show. That's where we'd be able to have your guys' comments, questions, and stuff be read in our chat. So let us know in the comments down below. And as I said, that'll be pending, so pay attention to our social media, more specifically our Twitter page, and we will let you guys know. If not, as I mentioned, we will get that out to you guys by Friday morning. So my initial thoughts on this matchup, as I quickly send our guest a invite. My initial thoughts, as I said, probably the first and foremost, I'm sure it'll be talked about quite a bit, is Buck Pierce's return to Winnipeg, a place where he spent the past decade previous as a player, as a coach, worked his way up to an offensive coordinator, and now gets his first head coaching job in BC, the place where he started in the CFL. Very cool storyline. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Of course, the next one would be for BC and slightly for Winnipeg. BC being on a short week, going to be an interesting one, having played on Saturday, quick turnaround, having to play on the Thursday. And then Winnipeg with the interesting one, of course, in the CFL, 9 teams the Week 1 bye, the dreaded Week 1 bye for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So they have yet to be on the field. We have yet to get a glimpse at this year's Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So it'll be interesting to get a chance to pick Zach's brain a little bit. And of course, the next would be Zach Collaros' suspension, meaning that Chris Streveler will more than likely be the starting quarterback for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers on opening day for them. And another one, I feel like this is going to be an early season. It'll be a pretty big game early on in the CFL season in terms of the West Division, leading up to, of course, these two teams play again in 9 days' time, I believe, playing on the Thursday. They then turn around and play again in BC that next Saturday, not the obviously 3 days later, or not the 2 days later, Saturday. 9 days later, they play in week number 3 in a BC place. So it'll be an interesting one in terms of if either team is able to pick up 2 Ws, meaning that they pick up 2 Ws, that's a huge victory in and of itself. And then, of course, picking up 2 Ws in the division as well is super important, especially when it comes to tiebreakers. I think this year is going to be super close down the stretch. Having these and collecting these early on West Division opponent wins, I think, is super key when it comes to playoff time later on in the season. So, other than that, I'm very interested to get a first glimpse at the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Talking about their Canadian talent, of course, they just drafted, 2 linebackers, Connor Shea, number 6 overall, Jalen Smith. I'm curious to see if any of those guys get in the lineup and have any meaningful contributions. Of course, the one, the only Nick Dembski, one of the most consistent Canadians in the CFL over the last 10 years. And of course, last year's MOP, Brady Oliveira, the best player in the CFL going into this year. And of course, he is a good Canadian boy. I'm very curious to see what Brady Oliveira is going to be able to do this season, as well as the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I think a guy like Brady Oliveira could definitely carry the Winnipeg Blue Bombers into good things this year. And of course, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in the situation that the BC Lions were in last season, with the Grey Cup being played in Winnipeg this November. So a lot of interesting storylines for Winnipeg this season, obviously going in. Their first game, as I mentioned, everybody's first glimpse at Winnipeg should be an interesting one. I'm interested to ask Zach about obviously new offense coordinator Jason Hogan as well. New look, new wrinkle offensively. I would imagine that defense will look pretty similar to what we've seen in the past from the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, but it should be a good one. These two teams have played pretty hard the last few seasons against each other head to head. I would say in the regular season, of course, meeting twice in the last 3 years, in the postseason and 2 West Finals. Winnipeg getting the better of both those playoff matchups. I would say Winnipeg was clearly the better team in both those playoff matchups. I would say in the regular season is where the BC Lions have had success against Winnipeg. In Winnipeg, I think of early last season when they blew them out in Winnipeg. I believe that was not week 2, week number 3, I believe I want to say last season. So an interesting one to keep an eye on in terms of they have played pretty good head-to-head matchups in the regular season. But come playoff time, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers have definitely owned the BC Lions when it comes to, I think, just playoff style football. Both games were definitely coached BC. If you go back and look, BC having an opportunity to win both games, I believe, just kind of outclassed and outmatched when it comes to playoff football. The little things of not taking penalties, the 4 or 5 plays that are going to win you the game. That's what Winnipeg has really thrived on the last 5 years, making it 5-time West Division champions, and of course representing in the Grey Cup, winning 2, losing 3. I think they really do the little things properly, and that's what Mike O'Shea obviously preaches in that building within their culture, and obviously is the reason why they've gotten so far. So that's probably another thing here before Zach joins us. I'm curious to see if the Winnipeg Blue Bombers can continue to stay on top. Last year I kind of stayed on the bandwagon until a certain point, and then of course they end up blowing out the BC Lions. This year, I think, is going to be an interesting one when it comes to new season, home Grey Cup, a lot of pressure with that. Obviously, um, having lost the last three, I think, is a mental hurdle that they have to get over in itself. And obviously, the Buck Pierce storyline is probably a little bit more of a smaller one, but how do the Winnipeg Blue Bombers kind of respond from here on out, in terms of being able to continue this? I don't want to say dynasty. I don't know what the right word is when it comes to Winnipeg, um, but continuing their dominance within, I guess, the West Division and competitiveness within the CFL. Quickly here, just sending Zach a message, folks. Other than that, though, this matchup, as I said, is a very intriguing one when it comes to pretty important for Winnipeg, pretty important for BC, as I mentioned with the West Division implications. But I think just both teams wanting to get off on the right foot this year. Winnipeg obviously went and proved this, kind of wrong last season, and I believe it was the 1-6, 2-7 start, and they end up turning things around, finding a way to make the playoffs, finding a way to win the West Division once again, and ultimately you can still have life in the CFL with only 9 teams, 4 and 5 teams in each division, having life only if you're only within 3 or 4 games, still not totally being dead by Labor Day. It's going to be interesting to see just how competitive the Winnipeg Blue Bombers are this year. I would think a lot of Winnipeg fans believe that they still can continue this dynasty that they have created and can continue their um, strong play within the West Division. I think the only thing now is that they probably want is to win the big game. They're tired of winning the West Division final, and it's time to win a Grey Cup once again. So perfect timing to bring in my guest of the video, one Zach Schnitzer of Bonfire Sports. Zach, thanks for joining us, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing well, buddy. How are you?
We're doing really well. It's football season, so how can we complain out west? And the weather is beautiful, I might add. So, Zach, you obviously have been waiting for football season, although as a CFL fan, I know you are getting to enjoy week one from, I'm sure, a lot less. The blood pressure was a lot lower, I'm sure, than watching, your Winnipeg Blue Bombers. How is it now that you are, week one is here technically for you guys, obviously being week two, but how is it that you're going to see your team this week for the first time?
Well, it's very exciting, Cole. I mean, I'll be honest, 3 straight Grey Cup losses, coming oh so close to a dynasty. When the season ended last year, I was of the opinion I don't even care about the regular season next year. I just want a Grey Cup. But I've had the winter to cool off, literally and figuratively, and I'm ready to go, man. I'm actually really, really excited about this Bombers team. I think they're better than last year. I think they've added some nice pieces, and I think the coaching addition of Jason Hogan and Jarius Jackson might do some interesting things on offense that maybe we haven't seen as much of in the past.
Yeah, you mentioned Jason Hogan, and that's kind of where I wanted to start, Zach. I was curious to kind of maybe pick your brain a little bit of what you think a Hogan-led offense might look like. You obviously alluded to Jarius Jackson. I know he arrived late there to Winnipeg, and obviously he'll have a pretty big influence on the offense, being a former offensive coordinator within the CFL in Edmonton. And I'm curious to see how that one works. But obviously, with the ties to BC and taking Buck Pierce from Winnipeg, and then Jason Hogan kind of slotting into that new spot. How do you kind of see a Jason Hogan-led offense this year?
It's really interesting. So he was interviewed for the first time the other day for bluebombers.com, and he held his cards very close to his vest, so he didn't give away much. On the surface, judging by the fact that he was the former running backs coach and he has a very close relationship with Brady Oliveira, my first inkling would be to think that the run game is not going to be abandoned this year. I think he's going to rely on heavily on Brady, would be my guess. I also think they've got Streveler. Streveler is going to be playing this week because Zach Collaros is suspended. And I gathered from Streveler's interview, and I saw at an event recently at the Bombers put on, And I gathered from that Streveler wouldn't have re-signed if he wasn't going to be used appropriately. In other words, last year Buck Pierce really just used him as a short yardage quarterback. And I'm not going to say Chris Streveler is the most accurate quarterback around, but what he does give you is different looks. He gives you the RPO. He can throw the ball. Maybe not the most accurate, but he can throw it. He can run. Yeah, he can do the end. He can do a sweep. He can do an end around. Like he can do multiple things. So I think with that, with Straller and with Brady Oliveira, I think Zach is going to cook this year. I think Hogan is going to let Zach let it rip. Honestly, um, so I think there'll be more running. I think Zach will have a good year. But it's hard to say. I mean, he said he's going to put his own spin on the offense in his interview, so it'll be interesting to see what that looks like from Jason Hogan. And I think Jarius Jackson is a really helpful component of this offense because Jason Hogan is pretty raw at this. Like he's a rookie OC. He's never done this before at the pro level, and he's stepping into some big shoes. Like, Paul Lapalisse in the past few years, and then it turned over to Buck Pierce, guys who have quite the pedigree and winning record for that matter. So, I think there's going to be some growing pains, and that's fine. But I think Darius Jackson has been an interim head coach, been an OC, he's been a quarterbacks coach, he's been a quarterback in this league, and I think he's really going to help Jason Hogan sort of settle in. The one thing I'll leave you with on this topic is I don't think they're going to abandon the run in the Grey Cup.
So talking about the Grey Cup, Zach, I actually want to rewind to the Grey Cup and actually talk about some good for Winnipeg, and I want to talk about I don't want to say arguably the best player that was on the field there in Vancouver for the 111th Grey Cup in Willie Jefferson. And not really kind of a question for you, more so just kind of want you to talk a little bit about him and kind of rave about him. I feel like still the best player in the CFL, best defensive player, excuse me, in the CFL in terms of impact. A lot of maybe things that don't show up on the stat sheet. Obviously, there is some with the batting passes and stuff like that. I just feel like the drawing of attention, creating other opportunities for defensive linemen, I feel like it goes unnoticed a lot. As well as I just feel like continuing to play at a high level at his age, with people maybe wondering about kind of a drop off and stuff like that. I feel expect Willie Jefferson to continue to play at a high level. As I mentioned, was fully the best player on the field at the Grey Cup. Arguably, probably should have maybe took home the MOP or excuse me, the Grey Cup MVP in a losing effort. What are you just kind of expecting from Willie Jefferson this year? Obviously, with the Adam Bighill not coming back, I don't want to say that he's going to have to maybe take on a bigger leadership role, because that's Willie Jefferson kind of to a T, is doing his thing right, of a very big boisterous guy. He's not afraid to let his voice be known. So Willie being Willie, what are you kind of just expecting from him on the field once again this year?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because he's been around for a while now, Cole, right? Like, and you kind of expect him as he's getting older, maybe to drop off a little bit, but he hasn't. I mean, and you nailed it talking about that Grey Cup. He could have been the MVP. I think if the Bombers would have won, he very well could have been the MVP, probably would have been. Um, I think when Willie Jefferson decides to wreck a game, he can wreck a game. He's that good. I don't know if he's the best, in my opinion, defensive player in the league. I think I look at a guy like Wyndon McManus, who I think should have won the Grey Cup MVP. I thought he was all over the field, middle linebacker for the Toronto Argonauts. But I think he, with that wingspan, the way he, like, batting down a ball. I mean, you only get 12 or 13 drives in a game. When you're batting down balls on second down, on second and medium or second and long, those are drive killers. Those are akin to sacks, right? Like, and so those things matter. And so I think Willie, I mean, he brings a lot of energy, he brings a lot of personality. He is absolutely a fan favorite here in Winnipeg. When Willie Jefferson's at an event, all of the fans just basically moth to a flame. He is just such a personality. His wife is really big in the community. Kelly, she does a lot of Bombers Women's Club events, so they're just beloved in the community. The only thing I'll say about Willie is sometimes you don't really notice him so much, and I'm not sure if that's because of scheme or because sometimes he has a hard time keeping that intensity the entire game. But I do know that when he decides to lay it on, he can be a game wrecker. The thing last year, you're talking about stats, Cole, and I think that's important. When I think about Willie and the lack of stats maybe last year, Jordan Younger, the first year defensive coordinator, he like rushed 3 guys a lot and drop, 9 into coverage, 8 into coverage or whatever. And so you're not going to get the stats. If you're rushing 3, you can easily be double teamed. You're not gonna get very many sacks. The Bombers were last in sacks last year. The interesting thing, and I don't know if the preseason is indicative of the type of scheme changes we might see from Jordan Younger. He did have the number 1 ranked defense in the league last year, so he maybe doesn't have the impetus to change anything. But I did see a lot more blitzing and 4-man rushes. And from everything I hear, James Vaughters, who's going to play opposite Willie Jefferson on the defensive end spot, can also be a game wrecker, right? Like, this is a guy who was so good that he played a couple of years in the NFL. So if Jordan Younger wants to rush 4, there might be a few more sacks in Winnipeg's future, and I think the interior is going to be better too. I mean, Cam Lawson was a highly touted draft pick, Canadian D tackle. He got hurt in the preseason last year. He's now back, and I'm excited to see what he brings. You know, he's going to spell off Jake Thomas, who is a great rotational guy, great in the locker room, but you know, he's getting out there, right? Like he's not going to cause a ton of pressures at this point in his career. So I think with Cam Lawson, and then another guy that's really popped this preseason is Devin Adams in the interior, American D tackle. I think he can push the pile. I think Winnipeg's kind of missed that since losing Ricky Walker, Casey Stales, Stove Richardson, Drake Nevis in the past few years. We maybe didn't have that as much last year, but I think Adams and even Woods are coming on. So all of that to say, Cole, that as you know, being a football fan and a football media guy, if other guys on the D line are creating pressure and eating up double teams, that just frees up Willie Jefferson to do Willie Jefferson things, which is always a fun thing to watch.
Well, let's maybe hold off on those Willie Jefferson things for a couple of weeks, okay, Zach? I know as much as maybe you'd want to see them these next few weeks, but let's get into the matchup itself, Zach. A few questions for you before we get you out of here. If you can maybe just start with the matchup, talking about maybe kind of your thoughts, just kind of quickly of Winnipeg's offense versus BC's defense, and then you can kind of flip it over and kind of talk about maybe the matchup of Winnipeg's defense versus BC's offense.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what the Bombers do on offense. I know our play-by-play man, and he's absolutely awesome. Derek Taylor was talking about Bombers maybe throwing on first down to open up the run game. So it'll be very interesting. I mean, there's some new receivers here, Cole. Gareth Stearns is in there. Kirk Wheatfall's in his second year. He showed flashes in preseason. So, and then you can't talk about the offense this year of the Bombers without Dalton Schoen. Dalton Schoen is Zach Collaros' safety blanket. He missed him big time last year. And so I think with BC will go as Nathan Rourke goes. I don't think they have a poor defense, but I don't think defense is necessarily a strength of the Lions. So if you can go shot for shot with Nathan Rourke and force him to throw into small windows when you're dropping that many DBs, and it could be a long night. Like, Nathan Rourke has never beaten the Blue Bombers, which is interesting, right? Because he's torched other teams, and he looked really good last week. So it should be interesting. I mean, BC's run game got going, and then he sort of, he had the guys creep up to the line, and then he went over the top to Berryhill a couple times, a couple touchdowns. Rourke should have had 4 touchdowns last week when Couture drops that one in the end zone. So the Bombers are going to have to be sharp if they want to stop Rourke. But in the past, they have shown the ability to limit his effectiveness. They picked him off a number of times. So the Bombers defense plays, you ever watch any of Lapo's videos? He talks about man match coverage, and I'm not smart enough to tell you exactly what that is, but I do know it's kind of like a mix between man and zone where the DBs switch off depending on who's in their zone, and it's very hard for quarterbacks to zero in on an open man. That's about as good as I can do a job as telling you what man match coverage is. But it'll be interesting to see if that maybe gives BC some problems. But we'll see. It should be an exciting matchup. BC's coming off a short week. Winnipeg is a little bit of unknown, so it should be exciting. You never know in week one. This is week one for the Bombers. It's often like a, you know, overhyped preseason game because they're still working out the kinks. So I don't know who's going to win this game.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about match coverage. I remember a coach telling me it's man until it's zone and it's zone until it's man. So it's like you said, it's a little bit of both. And it's an interesting one. I'm glad you brought up Coach Lapa. I really enjoy his videos of
Yeah.
some of that stuff. It's a great educational tool for CFL fans and really try to push it to any time I come across it for sure. So continuing, Zach, I'm actually glad before I ask you the last question that you actually did mention of, Nathan Rourke's struggles against Winnipeg. I did touch on before you jumped on here of, Winnipeg's really owned us when it comes time to postseason in 22 and 23. And then we've had, our battles in the regular season with, the last few years, but kind of almost forgetting the point of, it's been VA here the last in 23 and last year of getting those victories in 22. Obviously, the regular season, I believe it was that matchup of undefeateds there in week 5 or 6. I was actually there with, I know Noah, so I was the
Yeah.
unfortunate one of kind of getting ripped by the Bombers fan in BC place of kind of putting the pin in the balloon a little bit that day. And then obviously the injury happens, and in playoff time, you guys really look good as well. And then when he came back last season, I believe was the game he didn't look very comfortable as well. So as you said, hasn't had much success against Winnipeg, so it was an interesting one. I'll definitely talk a little bit about that some more after we get you off of here. But my last one for you, Zach, I'm curious. As you can see, I don't know if you can maybe see, but I am a Buffalo Bills fan, so I know about losing 4 Super Bowls. But
Yeah.
can you tell us of what kind of why the Winnipeg Blue Bombers will defy the odds like once again this season and get back to a Grey Cup? Not only get back, obviously you said that you want to win it this time. Why do you think the Winnipeg Blue Bombers can defy the odds and get back to a sixth Grey Cup and this time winning it?
I'm gonna echo Derek Taylor on this one. He does a great job of tracking everything about the Bombers because in the CFL, like the CFL, Genius Sports, they don't do a great job of showing you the stats, and even PFF, which has done a nice job with the CFL, you don't have access as even media. Most media members, we don't have access to the raw numbers. What Derek pointed out was that the Bombers lost 22% of their roster to injury last year, which is a very high number. So you think the regression to the mean is probably going to happen. They're not going to lose that many guys. I don't think they're going to have that many injuries this year, and injuries hamper them. Like you said, Dalton Schoen is taking the silver bullet out of your gun, right? So I don't think they're going to have as many injuries. I think even if Peyton Logan takes a while to return, and he was an underrated signing by the Bombers, our return game was below average last year with Lucky Whitehead, and I think it's going to be better this year. It has to be better. Trey Val in the return game showed some jump. Even if Peyton Logan can't come back, I think the O line had to gel last year. There were some new guys there. I think they're more familiar with Zach Collaros now. So I think if there's not a lot of injuries, if that O line gels reasonably well, I th- I also think that there's there's reason to be hopeful on defense. Uh, Adam Bighill is a phenomenal Hall of Fame player, but he wasn't the same player. And Tony Jones, who stepped in when Biggie went down, played middle linebacker, sort of a cast off from the Edmonton Elks, played really well. They've now got Jonathan Jones in who can play middle. They've got first round, 6 overall pick Connor Shea, who could have been the first round pick, who's been likened to one Alex Singleton. So they've got some real depth there. They still have Kyrie Wilson at linebacker, Reddick Cramdy. Marquise Bridges steps into the role vacated by Tyrell Ford. That's a hard role to fill. But the Bombers over the last few years have shown a penchant for finding stud DBs. And if they're confident in him, I am too. Brendan Alexander was getting older there, and I think Jamal Parker, if he plays safety, brings a lot of youth and energy there. So I think there's reason to be optimistic for the Bombers. And like I said, you could take the last three Grey Cups, Cole, and you could look at the underutilization of Brady Oliveira in all three of them, especially the last one. And I just do not the relationship he has with Brady. I'm talking about Jason Hogan, the offensive coordinator. I don't see that being an issue this year. I think with Streveler, if he can stay healthy, with Peyton Logan even in the run game, there's this young American rookie, Quentin Cooley, who they call the shuttle bus, who really popped in preseason. He's on the practice roster. I think the run game could be really dynamic. You could see some very innovative and interesting looks because rookie OCs tend to have new, fresh ideas, right? So you could see a lot of multiple looks. You won't probably see them in the first game of the season because they hold their cards close to their vest, right? It's a long season, but I'm optimistic, man. Which is I'll circle back to the way we started this chat. I wasn't at the end of the last season. I was like, screw this, win the Grey Cup. I'm done with this crap. And now I'm like, you know what? I'm ready for week two in the case of the Bombers against BC, buddy. I think it's gonna be fun.
Football season is here, buddy. I'm glad you get to enjoy to see your Winnipeg Blue Bombers for the first time this season. Before we get you out of here, Schnitzy, let the people know where they can find all of your work, and of course, where all you guys are going to have your fun over at Bonfire Sports with you, DB, Wallaby this season. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of good coverage. I can't wait to join the Bonfire After Dark crew again this season from time to time whenever I can drop in. So let the people know where they can find your guys' work.
Yeah, so gonna continue with the post-game shows, Cole, over at Bonfire Sports. We usually go about 15, 20 minutes after the final whistle. DB starts while I'm getting home from the stadium, and then we go. So we have a lot of fun on game day after dark. Me and Darren Bombing, and then Chris Walby and him do the pregame show. And I know Darren's gonna be pumping out some other content as well. He's got a young phenom, Zach Nolan, working with him this year. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the season. Uh, you can find us on social media, Bonfire WPG, and of course you can find me at Zach Schnitzer 48. And yeah, it should be a good season, my friend. I'm looking forward to covering the Bombers again and being a crazy fan, and then chopping it up with Darren after. And of course, the best part of it all, as you probably feel, is having those people on chat, right? Like interacting, hearing people's takes. It's great. I really miss the people on the chat, and I look forward to seeing them in a couple days.
Yes, indeed. It's all about the CFL family interacting with each other and enjoying, obviously, our beautiful game that is the Canadian Football League, Zach. So enjoy Thursday night, buddy, and we'll chat soon.
Okay, thanks, Cole. Talk to you soon.
Of course, that was Zach Schnitzer of Bonfire Sports. So appreciative of Zach for jumping on here. As I mentioned, Zach's been a loyal friend, jumping on here multiple times throughout the last few years. Bombers post previews, excuse me, off-season primers. Of course, as I mentioned, our mock draft a few months ago. Zach came on here, had a ton of fun picking for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and of course, now we continue to get into the matchup here for the next 25 or so minutes. We'll see how we do. So, before we get into the next little bit here, folks, if you guys enjoyed, please feel free to like the video, comment down below a question for myself, how you're feeling about the matchup, and or leave a question down below for Zach himself. Who knows? Because as I said, the BC Lions are hosting the Winnipeg Blue Bombers in 9 days' time after they tangle on Thursday night. Maybe we'll have Zach back on for next week's preview as well. Although we're going to try to get a different guest, although not wanting to save Zach's a last resort. Of course, Zach's my first option, but it is a long season, so wanting to save Zach's appearances as much as possible. So we'll see what happens come next preview. That being said, we got week number 2 preview to finish, folks. So quickly, going to get into the injury report. before we get into the matchup itself. So, um, in terms of out, we will just go through the outs really quickly, which we see is Adam Auclair, who was out last week as well, been on the 6 game. Jeremy Lewis is a new one with a foot injury. He was a DNP Tuesday at practice and is listed as out. That is a new one this week. Maxime Royer out as well. I believe he was out last week as well. I don't believe he was out last week. And Deshaun Stevens, a hamstring injury. He was a DNP on Tuesday and out as well. Of course, the quick turnaround means they're only on the field for Tuesday practice and Wednesday a walkthrough, a lighter practice where there will be a injury report, but it will be a lighter type practice. You will be able to get obviously an indication of a guy's limited. If a guy's full participant, he's probably eligible to play. If he is out, he's obviously out. Or if he's a DNP, I guess I should say. If he's a DNP, that means he's out, which they've already put in game statuses. I would imagine nothing's going to change from this. The interesting ones, and the last one that's out actually is Josh Woods. Speaking of Josh Woods, though, when looking at the injury report, Josh Woods was listed as a limited participant. I believe it was Raw Report that reported, funny enough, that he saw Josh Woods at practice as well as Adam Auclair in uniform and helmet, if I'm not mistaken. So practicing, as mentioned, in a limited capacity. Would imagine they're going to try to get on the field as quickly as possible. Josh Woods more than Adam Auclair. Adam Auclair probably returning not probably in a depth option, where Josh Woods is trying to get back into the starting lineup. With Micah Alway looking really good last week, looking solid. With Ben Haladic looking good, having an interception for 61 yards, returning it for 61 yards down to the goal line. Looked good, did his job. And of course, Deontay Williams in that new spot at nickel, Sam linebacker, thought he did his job as well. Arguably laid the hit of the year in week number 1. Josh Woods was an interesting one to see a limited participant. You wonder when you're going to see Josh Woods on the field, having torn his ACL probably around a year ago to the date, pretty close to the year ago to the date. It was early in 2024. When Josh Woods returns to the lineup, does he immediately get back into the starting lineup? I think is an interesting question with Haladic and Alway in the lineup already. Where does he fit in? I think with Alway's veteran presence as well as his physicality that he brings, you don't want to see him, especially the free agent addition, taking him out of the lineup. I don't know if I see that. Haladic is more the likely option, but then with the ratio options of Una not being available, Haladic needs to be in the lineup as a starter. Could obviously work some things around with Una being back around practice today. I believe he was a full participant, which we'll talk here in a second. So things could change ratio-wise, but it'll be interesting to see when Josh Woods returns as a full participant, where does he slot in, and is it in the starting lineup or is it as a reserve? So moving on in the injury report, as I mentioned, the other interesting one was Ana Una, offensive lineman, went down in the week 3 game versus week 3 preseason game versus the Edmonton Elks with an ankle injury. He was a full participant on Tuesday, today, the day of the recording, and is listed as available for the game. So it'll be interesting to see, do they mess with the starting 5 or do they stick with who won them week number 1, or do they bring back in Ana Una to start versus Winnipeg on a short week? We'll see how the bodies are feeling up front. Maybe they give him the week 2 off, and we'll give you an extra little bit of a longer time to rest the body, rest the ankle, and get back come week number 3 versus Winnipeg again. So other than that, Kameka Toure obviously was one to keep an eye on with the head injury, having to probably be in the concussion protocol and pass it. He is listed as a full participant and available. Who else? Tyler Packer, another one. Shoulder injury listed as full and available. Marcus Moore, another one, had to clear the protocol. Dealt with that injury from the game down in Langford. Concussion issues. Didn't really feel it the effects during the game, and or I believe the initial few days following the game, but end up getting some symptoms a few days after and end up getting into the protocol, and been in the protocol now for I think a few weeks now since we've been down to Victoria. What was that, the 19th, I believe? So yeah, going on a few weeks that Moore's been in there. Obviously a pretty serious one, a legitimate one, maybe not a serious one, but not to mess around with when it comes to head injuries. But a good sight to see that he was a full participant and is available for the game. And other than that, Trey Crawford, I guess, is another one that could get into the starting lineup. I guess I shouldn't say starting lineup. The active lineup, the active roster. He was dealing with a leg injury. He was a full participant and is available once again this week as well. And that just about wraps up the injury report for BC. Now, to get into the matchup a little bit here before we get into our three keys and then wrap the show up tonight, I'm going to start with BC's offense versus the Winnipeg Blue Bombers defense. Got to start with QB1. We've done it for a few shows now, and it's time to continue to talk about Kid Canada QB1. Continue to rave about him and talk about his talent on and off the field. He was, you know, it's unfortunate to say he was a few plays away from being great on Saturday, but the plays not really having much, with him not having control much in the outcomes of each play. Talking about more specifically the issues in short yardage. Chase Bryce coming in and falling short 3 times in the opening quarter. And then, of course, Javon Catoy dropping a open touchdown that was on the money. If Rourke hits that touchdown, he finishes with 4. I believe he finished 322 yards, probably finishes with about 340 or so, 4 touchdowns. Phenomenal afternoon for Nathan nonetheless. And I think his X factor, or the X factor in the game, came from, all the hype and all the talk, rightfully so, deservingly so, I should say, was for Trey Ford and his electrifying plays that he put on display in BC Place. As I said, rightfully so. But Nathan Rourke, ladies and gentlemen, made multiple plays, specifically there in the third and fourth quarter drives, scoring drives in the third and fourth quarter, where his legs were the X factor in the game on Saturday, and they showed up in a big time way. Now, the only thing I will say in a negative way is just protect yourself. There was a few times that Nathan taking maybe a little bit of a bigger hit than he probably needed to. So, Nate, protect yourself, buddy. We need you in the lineup. That's all I would say. Other than that, continue to use your legs as you have and weaponize them against opposing defenses. I'm curious to see what the Bombers will do on Thursday, having watched that, potentially not wanting to take anybody out of coverage and kind of maybe more of a spy, obviously, with teams doing that against Trey Ford, and Nathan not really having too much success to covet a spy. I'm curious to kind of see how they keep an eye in terms of maybe some more contain rush angles from the defensive ends, wanting to keep him in the pocket, wanting to try to collapse the pocket and kind of bottle him up, not allowing him to use his legs. I think that was the backbreaker a lot of the times for Edmonton defensively on Saturday. When talking about Trey Ford, I was screaming from watching from NBC Place there of contain Trey Ford at all costs, contain Trey Ford at all costs, and lo and behold, I would imagine if you were an Edmonton fan, you were probably doing the same thing for Nathan Rourke, watching him escape time and time again in the second half there. So curious to see how Nathan uses his legs. When speaking about his legs and these short yardage issues, how do the BC Lions handle that? I'm curious to see. I was kind of cautious, not cautious, I don't think is the right word, but curious, I guess, is more the kind of appropriate word of how the BC Lions would handle it on a short week, maybe leaning towards wanting to fix the issue next week, having the extra few days off. And to plan, it appears they may go with the switch right away. Farhan Lalji asked the question or just pointed out and asked a question of, he was working with the short yardage unit today in practice. how is his comfortability having done it in the past? He said he was obviously in the post game press conference. He was asked as well, and said he was open to it. Whatever the team asks, he will do. He is good in those situations. As I put together a little video showing a few highlights of his running ability in short yardage, it is a weapon. It's just a fine line of, as I mentioned, freak things happening, especially in the piles of guys falling on top of legs, things rolling. As I said, big bodies being falling on top of legs, being twisted up. Weird freak injuries happen in those piles, and I would hate to see Nathan be lost for a full season due to a short yardage play. Although it is kind of somewhat sound contradicting when, you know, the importance of it, you're also kind of devaluing it a little bit when it comes, Nathan, I'm curious to see how it develops throughout the season. If it's maybe just a quick fix and they maybe try to take the buy, not the buy, I guess you'd say the mini buy of, as I said, 9 days rest. Probably, you take the day Friday and maybe start to plan of, Saturday, Sunday this weekend, how they're going to fix it for the rest of the season, not wanting to risk work for the remainder. Maybe this is kind of the band-aid that you're putting on it for a week, not wanting to have Chase Bryce in that situation again this week, having gone 0 for 3. I'm curious to see how they handle the short yardage situation. So when talking about the offensive line next, we talked about it with Zach. Do not let Willie Jefferson decide to ruin this game. At all costs, make sure that Willie Jefferson is relatively quiet. Obviously, when it comes to great players like that, you're more so trying to limit them in terms of production, in terms of impact on the game. Willie Jefferson's definitely a player like that. Got to try to limit Willie Jefferson, especially when it comes to batting passes with Nathan. I know he's done that effectively in the past. Priority number one, do not let Willie Jefferson ruin the game. When it comes to James Butler and the run game offensive line there, I talked about it on another little video that I created of, James Butler's workload was nice. It was very solid in the 13 touches, 90 yards. I only think it's going to get more and more. They're going to add more and more to his workload throughout the course of the season, and not wanting to run him into the ground too early this season, not wanting to kind of put too much on his plate. I would think keep him around that 15, 20 or so touches throughout a game. Kind of wait till, post Labor Day, September, October, November. Then you really start to give him start to ramp up his touches even more and really start to let him impose his physicality and let him start to leave his mark on games. Even so, in the 13 touches, leaving his mark on the game, James Butler will do so in a light workload and limited touches. So continue to let JB eat, but maybe don't let him overwork himself too early in the season, having the end goal in mind of having him fresh and ready to go come playoff time. We saw Xander Horvath a few times throughout the game last week, and unfortunately for Xander, no carries within that, but he was, I would say, an unsung hero in one play and was a big part of why a little part of why Stanley Berryhill caught that first touchdown from Nathan Rourke on the corner route. The play action was great, sold it to the whole defense, sold it so much that the defender took out Xander Horvath because he thought he had the ball. Nathan was able to come free on the play action pass to his left, finds Stanley Berryhill in the end zone for the touchdown. Xander Horvath played his part there, even though he won't show up in the score sheet. So another one to shift to the receiving core. Keon Hatcher, ladies and gentlemen, I think is something that people need to start paying attention to. He looked like very similar to that 2022-2023. Keon Hatcher had that similar burst to himself, was very quick in and out of his bursts, in and out of his cuts, creating some separation from the defensive backs, and still was in limited touches, wasn't a big workload. I think when talking about Keon Hatcher and being super high on him and excited to see him another year removed from his injury, tearing the Achilles in the playoffs. I'm excited to see if Keon Hatcher can return to a similar form. And I think it can go a long way that the receiving core, I think, that he plays in will help longevity for the receivers, as well as allow the receivers to function and be successful in the, as a Buffalo Bills fan, there's kind of been the motto with the Bills now of everybody eats in the receiving core and on the offense. And I think that's what this receiving core is going to adapt a little bit of. Stanley Berryhill goes off for 100 and so yards for 2 touchdowns this week. Katoy for 88 yards or around 90 yards. And then McInnes, Hatcher, both around about 50 yards. McInnes with a touchdown. I think that's what's going to kind of be, business, kind of what to expect from the BC Lions receiving core this year of 1 or 2 guys going off, 2 guys doing their job when it comes time of balls being thrown their way. They're catching them. They're making sure they're getting first downs. They're making sure when their name's called, when their number's called in limited action because of the receivers in the receiving core, they're making the most of their opportunities. I think that's what this receiving core, that's what their strength is the kind of ability to have each and any one of them maybe potentially do well in a given week. And I really think that, Aiden Eberhard is a guy that people are really sleeping on as well. I really think that Aiden Eberhard, along with Stanley Berryhill, can do this on a given week of step up when their numbers called and fulfill that role to the best of their abilities and step up in a pretty good way. So interested to see how the BC Lions kind of adapt that everybody eats mindset moving forward within the receiving core. So when talking about the BC defense here quickly, number one, obviously, arguably going to be my 3 keys with Schnitzer hammering it home multiple times with the new offensive coordinator in Jason Hogan. Stop the run and limit Brady Oliveira at all costs. Brady Oliveira coming into the season, from what we hear, fresh last year, being a little bit banged up, was definitely in a tough start to the year. He ends up finishing as the most outstanding player in the entire CFL. As I bang the drum, would that be correct English? Hopefully it is. As I banged the drum, yeah, that's correct English. Comment down below if that's not. As I banged the drum last year for MOP, Roland Milligan, that's not a slight at him, but I know Coach Shane Blake on the weekly show last year were kind of, Milligan. That was Brady's impact, I thought, should have been rewarded in 23. Wasn't, went to Chad Kelly. And this year, I thought it was rightfully so given to Brady for the MVP. Stop him is priority number 1 defensively. How can our front 7 do when it comes to guys like Haladic, Ollie in the linebacking core there? And then up front, I was very impressed with a guy like Dwayne Hendricks in his first appearance as a BC Lime. Thibaut Tabaye, Jonah Tabaye in the interior of the defensive line. Guys like Marcus Moore coming back, Christian Covington being in a depth role, maybe having some more impact in limited snaps, but being able to be fresh later in the game. Can that front 7 limit a guy like Brady Oliveira and, go a long way, I think, in helping the BC Lions win the game on Thursday is, making Chris Streveler beat him with their arm, right? Limit Brady Oliveira in the run game, limit him catching the ball out of the backfield. Chris Streveler is going to be a tough one to contain when you're so focused on Brady Oliveira in terms of his scrambling ability, but his downside is his inconsistency as a passer. So if you're the BC Lions and you're the BC Lions defense, Mike Benavides, Ryan Phillips in that meeting room, in the war room all week, I would imagine they're trying to limit Brady Oliveira. Shutting him down is obviously ideal, but more than likely, right, with these great players, as I said, limit him as best as possible, try to keep him under wraps, and make somebody else beat you. For me, make Chris Streveler beat you with his arm through the air. When talking about through the air, Gary Peters, man, still elite as it gets in the CFL. The best, arguably the best corner in the CFL. He continues to, the last few years, not be targeted and continue to just put up, quietly great seasons, right? And this year, I know Nick Kowalski tweeted out of the game grades. He was a CFL game grade, I believe, or maybe it was a PFF all-star team this week. And Nick mentioned that, he had 3 targets, 2 for PBUs and 1 for a -7 completion. Gary Peters, whenever the ball is thrown his way, is incomplete or it is not for many yards. Of course, Gary has been doing that for years now and should continue to be talked about as one of the best defenders and maybe the best defensive back corner in the entire CFL. So When talking about the secondary, I guess maybe putting, it's going to be interesting to see how they match up, especially with guys in the slot, guys like Jalen Edwards-Cooper, guys like Ronald Kent, when they're going to be matching up with Nick Dembski and Dalton Schoen returning from his season-ending knee injury last year. Ronald Kent going to get some work now against, more number one type receivers. Last year, playing a little bit more in the field. He's going to get that look in the boundary, right? With, some of those alpha dogs that he's going to go against, as I said, Schoen, Dembski. You flip over to the other side, Jalen Edwards-Cooper played corner the last few years with the BC Lions, moving into the slot, playing that halfback position. How does he fare against guys like Schoen, Dembski in the slot as well? That'll be an interesting matchup to keep an eye on as well. And then Matthew Betts. Matthew Betts was close multiple times to getting sacks, to being in and around Trey Ford, and then of course Trey Ford creating Houdini-like things, escaping the pocket, getting rid of the ball. Matthew Betts was very noticeable from being in BC Place with his jump off the ball, getting off the ball not way quicker, but quicker than the offensive lineman, and hitting them with swiping their hands, whatever it was. He was getting past them and getting into the backfield near Trey Ford. I think big things are coming from Matthew Betts this season. I think he's only really getting started, and was, I think he had 4 or 5 tackles and a tackle for loss, no sacks, but as I said, close on multiple plays. Lastly, leave you with defense. Stop the run and make Chris Streveler beat you, I think, is just the key to this game defensively. No slight at Chris Streveler because he is a professional for a reason. I'm not one of those guys that like to call professionals bums or they're bad, stuff like that. But he does have inconsistencies as a passer. That's been proven. Zach even knows that as a Bombers fan supporter. The Bombers fans, I believe, know that as well. So I'm not trying to hate on the guy. He does seem very likable, a very easy to root for as a fan. Not only if you're a Winnipeg fan, but a CFL fan. Follow him on a few of his social media platforms with his quarterbacking stuff, uh, quarterbacking stuff on social media. So a fan of Chris Shutler, but I really feel like that's the recipe to win defensively is limit Brady Oliveira and make Chris Shutler beat you as a passer. So when talking about special teams, to put a bow on things, I know there's some new wrinkles that the Bombers might throw out there. Mr. Automatic is going to line up there once again for the BC Lions, continuing to put the ball through the pipes. Carl Myers has been good so far, but obviously the key to Carl Myers is continuing to have consistency as a punter, and he booms one almost every game. So he's going to have that really booming punt, but it's keeping consistency, making sure that there's not too many ebbs and flows. It's nice and kind of steady, and there's going to be a nice uptick every once in a while if you're going to bomb one. So other than that, special teams, returners, I didn't mind what we saw from Jermaine Jackson as well. I thought he showed a little bit of wiggle, the opportunities he's got to return. So curious to see how that plays out. But that almost wraps me up for the week 2 preview show this week, folks. We're going to end with our 3 keys to the game, which I talked about it a few times. Don't need to spend too much time. Key number 1, make Streveler beat you as a passer. As I've said, I went on about this enough. Make Chris Streveler beat you as a drop back passer. And I think the BC Lions win this ball game by scoring more points than the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Next, I talked about it with the receiving core, and that is to let everybody eat. And I think that kind of ties into as an offense as a whole, let everybody eat, right? Let JB eat, let Xander Horvath eat. Heck, let Riley Pickett, let Andrew Pearson eat. Let those guys on the big team, on the jumbo package eat as well. The receiving core, I think, will continue to do their thing in terms of a new guy stepping up every week and all 4 and 5 of them staying consistent throughout all 18 games is what I'm expecting from the receiving core. Next and last key of the week is play for Buck Pierce in his return to Winnipeg. Whether Buck has actually he didn't play it down as much as I thought he would, being kind of the not wanting to give too much to the media. Mike O'Shea, I tell you too, folks. Watching his media availability today is dry and boring with the media. He does not give anything and definitely plays it up that he knows what he's messing with when he does not answer their questions. Fair enough, coach, because you have every right to do so when not wanting to give away any of your secrets. So I get it. But man, as a media guy or as a media member, whew, he does not, I don't even know what the word is, but he is dry and straight to the point. So I'm curious to see, Buck Pierce and how he kind of handles the emotions of being back there. I'd imagine there's going to be a video tribute or something of, announcement at least of thanking Buck Pierce, some acknowledgement. So how does he handle the emotions? And as we talked about, right, there hasn't been a situation yet for Buck Pierce of the having to balance the head coach hat and the offensive coordinator hat when you're kind of playing those both roles. Sometimes situations come up of having to juggle both of maybe he has so much trust in Benavides as a defensive coordinator, a veteran, a former head coach in this league, that he can kind of run the ship. If situations come up on defense, you know what, Benny, it's your call. We've had this talk, going into the season. It's your call. It'll be my call on offense. And I don't want to kind of be involved in those situations. I want to be able to focus on offense. Be curious to keep an eye on throughout the season in terms of how situational football comes into play with Buck Pierce as the offensive coordinator and a head coach. Wearing too many hats, can that be an issue? As of now, obviously only one game in, it hasn't been, but does it come up, and does he have trust in his coordinators that he's able to kind of run his ship on offense? And it's almost like three different units that are a cohesive team. So play for Buck Pierce and his return to Winnipeg, I think, is a super key one because the emotions will be super high. So I was going to say a quicker preview this week, but it's about the same, which is funny enough. But a short week, folks. So getting this out to you guys still, trying to get you guys the most content throughout the season. Of course, if you guys haven't, go check out our post-game show from the week 1 matchup with the Edmonton Elks. A BC Lions win 31-14. This will be out, as I mentioned, the weekly show will be out on Wednesday, every Wednesday, and it'll be live on the 13th Man YouTube channel, Instagram, and Twitch account. Of course, as I said, the BC Lions playing on Thursday. We are still pending a live post-game recap, or will it be a recorded one? We will be TBD on that one, but that will still be out Thursday evening after the game or Friday morning for you guys. So the content will be out, and of course, as I said, follow us on social media. The Instagram is popping right now, folks. We are uploading a lot of content, a lot of great content. Shout out to Matt Baker once again for allowing us a ton of access at BC Place for the home opener. Got a ton of good stuff there. So follow us on our Instagram at Canadian Football Fanatics over there. Follow us on Twitter at _CF Fanatics as well. And then, of course, like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. When you guys subscribe, press the notification bell. You guys will get a reminder every single time we upload a video or go live on the channel. Believe that is everything. We have crossed our T's, dotted our I's. I myself am pretty hungry. It is past dinner time, so I'm going to go enjoy some dinner. Tomorrow is Wednesday, so the week is flying by. We'll do the weekly show, and game day will be here before we know it. Folks, we hope you guys enjoyed week 1 and can't wait for you guys to stick around for week number 2, and we'll catch you guys on the next video.